Well, hello everybody. We were just saying before you all joined us that we think one of the reasons this research is so popular is that it gives everybody an opportunity to start arguing for more money in their job. So let me just get the slides up and we can make a start. Okay, so my hope is that you can all see that. What we're going to do is we're going to manage questions through the chat function. So if you have a question, just jump in the chat and share that with us, and we'll wrangle those as we go. And what I'll try and do is stop it at various places so you can so we can answer those questions for you. Okay, so this is the 2020 industry survey. This is the part of the industry survey that's about salary and about remuneration. So Alistair Allen at Research First led this project. He's not here, so I'm going to present it on his behalf. Those of you that don't know me, I'm Carl. Let's talk about the research. The research, I'm sure many of you participated in the research. The research is done how we always do it every year. We essentially use a census methodology, which means that we send an email to everybody who's a member when the research is done. You'll see from the second point that the survey ran in the week before the lockdown. Interestingly, that didn't seem to affect the response rate at all. We had 240 completed surveys, which is about 70% response rate. Last year, it was between 18 and 19. So we're about even. If you think about a survey of 240 people, if you randomly select them, you get a margin of error of around about 6%. So we're in the ballpark. In other words, this is a reasonably robust insight into how well people in the industry are paid. In fact, later on, I'm going to make the argument that this is the best data set about how well people in the industry are paid. So who did we hear from? We heard from a whole lot of women, but that's always the case. I think that recognizes the fact that the industry itself is largely feminized. We'll come back and talk about that. Again, compared to last year, about the same. Last year, we talked to 78% of those people that took part in the survey, 78% were female, so about the same. Again, the industry seems largely dominated by Pākehā. You can make an argument there's an underrepresentation either in the survey or in the industry of Pacific Islanders and Maori, but that's a conversation for a different day. Great distribution of age and great distribution of years of experience. And yes, these things are related, but they're not directly related. So this is really cool. We got a great spread of some young practitioners and some old practitioners, some people that have just joined the industry, some people that have been here forever. Mostly in the research, and again, mostly in the industry, what you see are in-house professionals. So we have a small number of people that work for agencies, other people that work for themselves. And we have a good range of sectors in the data: public sector, local government, central government, private business, and not-for-profit. Really good spread. I'll come back and talk about why that matters in a minute. So in other words, what I'm arguing is the research provides a really good insight into what's going on across the industry and enables us to talk meaningfully about REM in the sector. You don't care about any of that, you care about this. When you do the survey, what the survey shows is the mean income for people in the PRINZ, in the public relations industry in 2020 in New Zealand is $98,238. Now that seems like an awful lot of money. That is a mean result. Now, we've been doing some work at Research First with Careers New Zealand, and my first thought when I saw this was, I wonder if that means there's a premium for being a PRINZ member. That is, that there's a kind of a selection effect in which the PRINZ membership is better paid than the industry as a whole. How would we find that out? Well, if you go to Careers Gov New Zealand, they have what they think are normal salaries for people in the industry, and they think those salaries run up to about 85 grand. So your first thought is, well, that's cool. Being involved with PRINZ is itself a reflection of something. That's not the case at all, because these data are from PRINZ's 2018 survey. And if you look at them carefully, you can see that these data are lower than the data in this survey because they're for people with only up to 10 years experience. So Careers Government, no use to us at all. So where else could we go to get a comparison about, is this actually a meaningful difference? And the only other really useful data set available to us is the Hayes Salary Guide. Now, Hayes work in Australasia, but they do pull out their data for New Zealand. And what they say is, and again, their roles don't really align with the roles that we used in the survey, but If you're a communications advisor, your average salary is about 70K and the range is between 60 and 90. If you're an internal communications advisor, you're going to be up to 82K as a mean, and your salary range is between 70 and 100. And then if you're a manager, your mean's about 100, and the range is between 92 and 120. And if you average all that up, you get to about an average of 77K with a range between 75 and 105. And if you take the median of that, you're sitting somewhere in the mid-90s. So reasonably interesting. Except, while 98,238 is the mean income in the survey, the median's only 92,750. And when you get medians and means which are dispersed like this, it tells you really something interesting about the distribution of the data. For those of you that have forgotten your undergraduate statistics, the mean is the average you get when you add all the scores up and you divide it by the number of scores. The median is the middle of the distribution when you line them all up. Where's the 50 percentile in the middle of the distribution? So that's typical. When the median and the mean are different like that, it tells you that the distribution is skewed towards the higher value. So instead of having a normal distribution with a nice fat middle, that's skewed off to one side. And that's exactly what these data show. So when you have a good look at the data, they're skewed by the small number of people that earn more than 250 grand. So what that means is actually the median is a much better indicator of what's going on in the industry than the mean. That's really interesting. It also tells you something else. Average income is almost entirely meaningless. So as we're about to discover, to think about the income in this industry, we have to think about it by a whole lot of other variables. So before I go on and talk about that, do we have any questions about any of that? I'm not seeing anything in the chat as of yet. Okay, well, if I don't hear anything, we can press on. This whole point about average incomes being meaningless is really interesting, right? Because what the research shows is that income in the industry varies by gender. Come back to that in a minute, that's really interesting. It varies by the years of experience, which you might expect. It varies by age, which, as I said, is correlated with years of experience, but isn't a direct correlation. It changes with the role. It changes with the sector of the employment. And of course, because it changes with the sector of the employment, it changes with the location of the employment. In other words, the income in the survey variables by all the variables in the survey. So the average is almost entirely meaningless. Let's talk about gender. So the really interesting thing about the survey is the industry is dominated by women. The survey responses are dominated by women. On average, incomes between men and women are getting closer, but men still dominate in that really high end. So the men here on this graph are blue, women are red, the men are yellow, the women are blue. And you can see that the men are distributed down the really high end between 180 and 199. There's a little difference, but over 250, there are more men. Also, there are far more women down the bottom end, less than 25, 25 to 35, 35 to 45. Now we know this is largely because some women work part-time and are mixing work with other things, childcare, for instance. And so there are more part-time incomes for women, which means that they skew to the bottom end. But actually, given the dominance of women in the industry, the fact that men dominate the high incomes and are missing in the low incomes, is just a really interesting finding. In terms of experience, there's a clear relationship between experience and income. As you can see, we move from the left of the chart, less than 2 years. Don't worry about, of all of these bars, the one that's least reliable is the less than 2 years, because the subsample is only 18, right? So that's probably an overrepresentation. But regardless of that, you can see that as we move with years of experience, income goes up, but with diminishing returns. I drew this by hand, so excuse the shape of this chart. Hold on to the shape of this chart. This is called a sigmoidal distribution, because I'm going to come back to it in a minute. So clear relationship between experience and income, more years of experience, more income, except it's not linear and there are diminishing returns. You see the same thing with age. Again, of course you do, because they're correlated. As you get older, in general, you start to earn more money, but again with diminishing returns. That said, the sweet spot in this industry seems to be the gap the move that people make between 30 and 40 and between 5 and 10 years experience. And let me show you what I mean by that. As you move from a practitioner with 5 years experience into the group of people that have between 5 and 10 years experience, the average uptake in income is 22 grand. As you move from being a practitioner who's in their 20s to being a practitioner that's in their 30s, there's an uplift of about 27 grand. You don't see this kind of uplift at any other point in your career progression. So the sweet spot in terms of when things get better for you as a practitioner, between 30 and 40, and between 2 years experience and between 5 to 10. So role matters too, but again, not as much as you might think. So what we have here is we have the mean distribution for roles, and as you can see, as the roles become more senior, you make more money. The next slide flips this chart on its side. So it's still those bars, but I'm going now to flip it so it goes the other way. And again, you see exactly that sigmoidal relationship. As you get more senior roles, you make more money, but diminishing returns. So here's a question for you, right? We have a diminishing return with age, experience, and role, and all of those follow this sigmoidal distribution. Does that mean that what this research is really telling us is that the industry isn't paying its senior people enough? And again, we don't have the comparative data to answer that for you, but that's a question. And if this was a research project that somebody had brought to us as an insights company, that's where we'd be going with our conclusion and our recommendations. It actually looks like there's really, really good uptake in the middle of careers, but actually towards, as those careers mature, it seems like the uplift for experience and skills and seniority is not what you'd expect, or at least isn't what's predicted by earlier career progression. Okay, so how does that look? Well, if you're interested in averages, and I know that all of you are thinking, hang on, you just told me that average means nothing. If you're interested in averages, then the public sector does pay more money on average than other parts of the industry, and particularly central government. And on average, that uplift is about 10 grand a year. So it's not insignificant. But the problem with averages is they don't tell you very much. So absolutely the public sector pays the most on average, but the agency land is where the really big bucks are. So here on this chart, agencies are the one in yellow, and you can see if you want a salary, excuse me, over 160 grand, particularly if you want to start earning over 250, you've got to be in the agency world. So really interesting. If you're thinking about what's the best move in the short term, public sector is going to get you an uplift. If you're thinking long term, assuming that money is the thing that is driving your decision making, then thinking about a pivot to agency is a really good idea. Because public sector is large, public sector central government roles are largely distributed in Wellington, that means on average incomes are going to be higher in Wellington, and that's exactly what the data show. Similarly, because the agency jobs are primarily in Auckland, you're going to see those really high-paying jobs in Auckland. And again, it's what you see. This pink part of the chart in front of you are those roles over 250 grand. So no surprises there. Okay, so any questions about that before we finish up by talking about more than just money? No? Okay. Obviously, there's more to a job than what it pays you, and that includes things like time off and ability for training. Speaking of, this is a company away day that we had a few weeks ago at Mount Hutt before the school holidays when it was empty. This is one of the things that our staff really value about working at Research First. When we ask the people in the industry what are their common benefits, most people say they get access to professional development, maybe even through PRINZ. But after that, the commonality of benefits decays really quickly. And what that means is it's a long tail distribution. There's a whole lot of things that I've cut off this chart because there weren't many people getting them. But what people do seem to get is some kind of healthcare, even if that's a regular flu shot. They get the ability to work flexibly, which is, as I said before, really important. They get repaid for their phone, and they get contribution to KiwiSaver. 10% of the people in the survey said they got a gym membership, and 4% said they got a company car. Again, that's a small number of people, but it might actually be more people than you expected. 4% of 24. 6 or 7 people. And again, they may well be in agency land. But when we asked you what you wanted, people said they want more leave, and particularly more paid leave. They wanted either access to KiwiSaver contribution, or they wanted a higher KiwiSaver contribution. They were looking for professional insurance, indemnity insurance, health insurance. They'd like a gym membership, and they'd like a car park. So in terms of thinking about the other benefits as well as the remuneration when you're negotiating for your next pay rise or your next position, these are the kinds of things that people are really interested in. So somebody's just said, how representative of PRINZ membership is the in-house versus agency split amongst respondents? Again, sorry, I'll move that over there. To the extent that we can tell, we have a small number of agency people in the research, but the important point about 16% of the sample, but the thing about the agency people is they straddle both ends of the income, which is the really interesting piece. So agency people are absolutely at the higher end of income, but they're also distributed at the lower ends of income. And in a minute, we'll talk about hours of work as well. And I really like this question from Michael about, isn't diminishing returns old school thinking with PR younger operatives are the ones who acquire the skills more quickly? Absolutely, that's absolutely the case. But it does then raise an important question, doesn't it, about what does the career trajectory of a PR person look like, and what does it mean to be a PR practitioner, looking for a 20 or 30-year career. We've just finished a piece of work for engineering, the engineering sector, and one of the most interesting findings about that piece of work is they struggle to hold on to senior practitioners because engineers with 15 to 20 years experience pop out and become consultants or become managers. And so they're trying to think about what does a lifetime specialist engineer career look like, and what kind of rewards would you have to wrap around that to make sure that you're bringing in the new expertise relevant to the industry, but also holding on to that wisdom and that historical knowledge as you go. Okay, so can I have this back? So leave. So I said before about the agencies distributed at both ends. It's a bimodal distribution, less pay, more pay, but also the research shows that they work more hours and they have less leave. If you want more leave, you're better off working in the public sector, and particularly for central government. Yep, and as Kate's just said, it absolutely could be that PR practitioners get frozen at middle management. Let's pick this up in the conversation, because that's a really interesting point in terms of what would a career progression look like, and at what point would you think that you're no longer in the PR industry, even if you were coming from it and maturing into a different role. Okay, more leave in the public sector. And this has been a theme that's been in the research every year we've done it, right? And again, I've got to be really careful here because it's self-reported data and it's not measured data. But absolutely in the survey, what you people tell us, what you guys tell us, is that you work more hours than you're paid for. And some people work significantly more hours than they are paid for. And the people that are most likely to say they work more hours are the people in the most senior roles. So again, if you're thinking about a career and you're thinking about a lifestyle, while there is money and some prestige attached to those senior roles, it does seem like they're going to work longer. If you want to work in the agency, it does seem like there's an opportunity to make more money doing that, but it also seems like you'll have less leave and work longer hours. And this is that point here. Okay, here's the other thing that's really interesting about the research. Half the people in the survey in 2020 said they intend to be in a different role in 4 years. And in fact, nearly a third said they intend to be in a different role in 2 years. And again, you guys filled out the survey. We don't have enough room and time to find out what the key motivations are of that kind of career mobility. And particularly to think about, is there a career trajectory, implicit or explicit, in that move? So this sounds like people think that one way to get ahead is to be really mobile. Maybe that's about skills, maybe that's about seniority. Okay, so let's sum up. The research report looks like this, and and PRINZ will put it online so you can see it. Everyone's going to get a copy of this, which is this slide here, and that's an infographic that summarizes everything I've said so far. This is really cool to take away and have a chat about. But the most important point to remember from the conversation we've had is that averages in this industry are almost essentially meaningless, because the income and the nature of the employment varies by every variable in the study. So if you're in the process of negotiating your own package, you need to be thinking about what does an analogous role look like, so you can make a one-to-one comparison. And that's it. That's all I want to say. So I'm going to turn my screen off and we can jump into some Q&A. Right. So thoughts, comments, responses. Yes, Kate, sorry, it does. And so Kate's asked, the slide went too fast. Does it say men earn more at higher levels? It absolutely does. It says two things about gender, right? It says that the average incomes, the mean incomes of men and women are getting closer, and they've been getting closer in almost every survey we do, but men are still overrepresented at the highest levels of income. And again, I don't know why that is, but I'm sure you guys have some ideas. Kate's just asked another really good question, which is, what role does prior experience outside the industry play? For example, journalism, transitioning to PR, can you count that experience? Again, the problem with this survey is that, like every decent survey, it raises more questions than it answers. So I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a really interesting point. I suspect that what the industry needs is actually to think about career trajectories, because it goes back to Michael's point about, are the assumptions about seniority and experience coming with higher returns valid any longer? And what does a career trajectory look like? And building on that experience from the engineering sector, thinking about, where do PR practitioners go? Where do they hop out to? Emma's asked a brilliant question. Would you consider rating salary against a measure like happiness or well-being? That is a fabulous question, and I would love to build that in. Because if you think about what's in here, there's a lot of things in here. We've got things about, if you think about benefits, we've got flexibility, we've got hours of work, and we've got money, but we don't have job satisfaction, and we certainly don't have well-being. Let me have a look. So there's a question here about, curious to see the stats for the Christchurch South Island. The problem with Christchurch South Island is that the income is largely related to the sector. And so what you see more of in Auckland is you see more of the corporate sector. And what you see more of in Wellington is you see more of the public sector. And the data are good enough for us to see a clear distinction. In Canterbury, there the distinction, so there are 43 people from Canterbury, and incomes are a little bit lower than they are in Wellington. But at the same time, there are some people that make more money in that $160,000 plus. So there are fewer people at the very, very top end, but in that top last 5% group, Christchurch is pretty good there as well. Again, those data will be in the report and you get to see them. Wouldn't the role and future question be richer if it narrowed down to, do you intend to be in the PR industry in 3 years? So again, that's a really good question, but it's about career trajectories, right? Are you using comms and PR as a way to be somewhere else? Or has your experience with comms and PR made you think that actually you want to pivot and go into something else? I think lots of these questions are actually saying that in the next survey, we should be thinking really, really hard about career trajectories. Sorry, so Nikki, is there any insight into shares and ownership offering? Yes, there is, and it's in the benefits part, but it's largely related to agencies. So if you're at an agency, you're much more likely to be offered shares, you're much more likely to be offered a profit share, and you're much more likely to be offered a bonus. And Kate Moynihan, we do have some information about sole traders, but there's such a small part of the survey sample. I think he said turning pages quickly. They are, so sole traders are 2.5% and independent consultants are 4.5%. So the problem with that is as soon as we start breaking them down into location and income, the data really become way too soft for us to make any meaningful interpretations with. But that's a good question again about what's the motivation for becoming a sole practitioner. Is it about well-being and balance? So again, I think we're making an argument for we actually need rather than just a salary survey, we actually need a career trajectory survey and also a career assessment survey. So Karen said, do you see a sigmoidal distribution in other industries? Yes, but to a different extent. So engineers, in engineering, for instance, income is much more tightly correlated with experience than it is in the PR industry. But that goes back to Michael's question, doesn't it? About maybe in the PR industry, actually having a fresher set of skills or a newer set of skills is more valuable in the market than having, I don't know, whatever it is that engineers do. Do you think the responses to the survey will be different post-COVID lockdown? I think everything is different post-COVID lockdown. And what we're totally seeing in the other work we're doing are things like the ability to work from home, flexibility, people wanting more leave, more assurity, and certainly things more like sick leave. But it's a question to ask yourselves and ask your friends, like what would change? Now we've been through lockdown, now we're living in a different world. What would your ideal job look like now, your ideal employment conditions, and how would that be different to what you would have wanted this time last year? So one of the anonymous people have said, don't rely on average salaries. Absolutely not. Don't rely on the average salary in the survey because it varies by too much. But if you want a conversation with your employer, then you need to think about, so how many years experience have you got? What sector do you work in, what market are you working in, what role are you working in? Then you can dive into the data and get yourself a range of this is where you should sit, right? So the 98K or the 92K mark is worth, as an average, is a nice headline, it'll make a nice blog post, but it's almost useless in terms of your own negotiation. So I think jump into the report, find out what somebody in a role like you looks like, not just think about the money, but think about the other benefits too, and then take that to your next performance review. In other industries where men dominate, e.g. nursing, early childhood teaching, is there the same overrepresentation by men? Yes, Kate, absolutely there is. And the classic one is in primary teaching, where men are still overrepresented as principals, for instance. It's changing as they age out. But you know, the flip side of that is to go back to the average. I know I just said don't read too much into the average, but the fact that the female and male average are moving closer together tells you that actually in terms of new employment in the industry, it's much more equitable than historic employment in the industry. Would an hourly rate section be worth including? If people are moving to hourly rate contracts or being offered hourly rate work, then absolutely having something about hourly rates would be worth looking at. In the report itself, obviously I've skipped over, I mean, it's 50 odd pages. There's stuff about payment at the moment, how much is hourly rate, how much is daily rate, and what are those rates? So again, if you're looking for those kind of comparisons, they're absolutely in the report. So there's lots here, and I think what we're discovering is it's raising more questions than it's answering. But I do think that the key is going to be to think about career trajectories into and out of the industry, because that seems to be the way that the whole career planning world is working. So thinking, and this goes back to Kate's question about what's the basket of experiences by which somebody can parachute into a career in PR and comms, as opposed to training and developing a traditional career. Cool. Well, so that's all I've got. So
it looks like that's all of the questions.
Great.
Thanks so much, Carl.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That was a good discussion. So we have, if the report isn't up on our website, then it will be very shortly. And I'll send everybody that attended today a link to the report. Excellent. Cool. All right. Thanks, Carl, and thanks everybody for joining.
All right, cheers, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.